G'day, welcome to the Financial Bloke Podcast, the podcast for people seeking the wisdom needed to grow their family's wealth and live a happier, healthier and more prosperous life. My name's Ben Law and I am the Financial Bloke. Today, I've got David McLean with us. David is the Chief of Delivery for RCS Australia, which provides integrated training and education and also advisory services to the agricultural sector, based in central Queensland. David's been collecting and analysing data from producers all across Australia for almost 20 years using RCS's unique benchmarking and business analysis programs. Now, what that means is he's a real numbers nerd just like me, but he's also got that rare combination of strong analytical skills and the ability to convert that analysis into something practical and useful. He's also a really strong communicator. Now, why have I got David here for us today? Well, I've always been fascinated with what makes people successful, and I love nothing more than picking the brains of people like David to understand why some producers are really successful and others with what seems like the same resources just aren't. Now, I heard a long time ago that success leaves clues, and if you want to find out what makes the exceptional operators so exceptional, then today should be right up your alley. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Ben. It's exciting.
Now, mate, I'm going to start off with the first question I ask everyone, which is for us to get a better idea of who you are, what would you say is one of your key personal values, and how do you think that's contributed to the person you are today?
It's an interesting way to start a podcast, asking something like that.
It is. It's very deep, isn't it?
It is deep, yeah. And particularly usually don't talk about yourself like that. Probably honesty, where that sits and how that's contributed, is that I tend to make sure that I say what I mean and I mean what I say. And so from a delivery aspect in working with clients, I don't hold things back. If I've got an observation or a thought or a feeling that I believe may be useful for them in getting to where they want to go, I share that. Sometimes they might not enjoy the observation in that first instance. Now, most of the time it's fine, but sometimes they might not like it initially. However, they will respect it. And I think hopefully most of my clients now, they've come to know that I am very honest with them, and I do say what I mean, and I say what I see, and I am there for them.
Perfect. And what did I hear someone say a while ago is facts don't care about your feelings. Being a scientist, because I know you did rural science at uni, didn't you, is it's all about working out the facts first and then delivering those facts, which I think is really important in someone in your position especially.
Yeah. And that check I always use is this observational thought or feeling something that's potentially going to help these people that I'm working with get to where they want to be. If it's not going to help, well then there's no benefit in discussing it.
I appreciate that. Now, I've thought on this for a long time, and I came to the conclusion that arguing that success should be predominantly viewed through a financial lens is wrong. There's more to success than money. We know that. And there's many stories of multimillionaires and even billionaires who are miserable and unfulfilled. But in the context of running an agribusiness, it'd be sensible to give business and financial success a heavy weighting. So in all your years of sort of doing this, how would you assess whether someone's successful, or how would you define success to start with?
I think the first hurdle that I would use to define success would be whether people are achieving their goals and living their vision, which anybody's done work with us, they know we tend to spend a fair bit of time talking about those two areas. And the reason for it is central. What is success? It's knowing what you want to achieve and then being able to achieve them, those goals, and living that vision. It's living the life that you want to live in the way that you want to live it. And so money is one of the components within that. However, it's only one of the components. It's not all of it. So I agree. I don't think success should ever be defined in financial terms purely. It's definitely part of it. And I think success is very personal as well. And so I try to be very objective around this, working with people, that it's my definition of success doesn't actually matter. It's about trying to understand what it is for that individual person or people and understand that. So and everybody will define it in different ways and have different ideas of it, which is good. And it's important to identify that it is different and be really comfortable with it being different. You talked about some of those case studies of rich people that are pretty miserable. I also see a lot of people that are pretty miserable chasing something that isn't their dream. And that because they've defined that as success. And growth is a good example. And if you're not growing, you're going backwards. And there's definitely a lot of truth behind that statement. However, one of the things that I say at nearly every course or work that I do is that growth for growth's sake is a terrible strategy. I think that's where that misalignment with success and people feeling I need to be growing to be successful, if it doesn't align with what's actually important to you, then it might be the worst thing that you can do. And I think that's where that personal nature and that family nature also comes in. And particularly in agriculture, family is such an important part, and having that family business in a lot of cases, or working as a family in an operation. If you aren't able to work with family or spend time with family, if it's just all about work to get the growth, well, is that success?
And I think you see it all the time outside of agriculture as well. And I found it in the financial advice industry is people would view certain individuals who were making, say, a lot of money or their business was growing exponentially as being one of the most successful in the industry. And then you'd find out that they, got divorced, or the kids hated them, or they, got sick and couldn't work, or were so high in debt that they were stressed to the hilt. And so I think we've got to be really careful is who we judge ourselves against for success, because I think quite often when you look around, it can be a very warped sense of how well someone's doing, can't it? Because you can look at them across the fence and say, wow, this person's doing really well, but their reality might be completely different to what you're sort of thinking it is.
I'd go as far as saying that their reality may not be different to what you think it is. I'd say it would definitely be different. And I'm really clear, because it's interesting how you see quite often people talk about success and they'll link success to what they see that people have. There's those belongings which you're referring to there, the things. And that tells us nothing. And so if people say, old mate down the road, he just got a new truck, he must be going really well, and this is what he does, so he's going really well. And I say, well, sorry, have you actually looked under the hood of the business? Have you seen their numbers? Have you done any analysis on that? Do you know what their actual position is? And the answer is always no. And so I'm sorry, you actually can't comment. And it's really not a good use of your time and energy to be thinking about how successful that business is or isn't when we don't know. We need to come back to looking at, well, what is it important to you? And just having stuff doesn't mean anything. It just means they might be better at writing a loan application,
or they might be more risk tolerant. So, yes. In other words, they're happy to be getting a knock on the door from the bank every week saying you've missed your payments, etc., or you're under pressure. Who knows? Yeah. One of the things that I found with goal setting, because that's a real buzzword in the financial advice industry, is what are your goals and objectives? And for most people, they sort of look at you blankly. But I've quite often found that working out what your measure or your goals are or your measure of success is probably the hardest part. Like, what do you actually want? Because you've got to strip out what society tells you is success, or what your parents or your friends or your colleagues tell you is success, to what is actually success to you. So how hard do you think it is for people to get over that first hump of actually defining those goals? Yeah,
incredibly. It's I would say that it's probably the hardest work that we do with clients, and it's also the most important work that we do with clients. It is just central. If we don't know what you're trying to achieve, then how can you make decisions? You've got to have those goals, got to have that direction. And I find you've got to come back a step from goals and look at that vision or bigger picture first, because that vision is that dream. That's about where you want to go. And then the goals are small, meaningful steps to help you to get there. And if you don't know what that big picture vision is, well, then I think setting goals is even harder again. It's still pretty difficult, but you've got to chunk it back to an end point, to something that you're actually working towards in a series of goals. And it's being willing to start small. And everyone's different in terms of how to set goals, and there's definitely not a cookie cutter approach. So when we're facilitating this with people, there's a lot of thinking on your feet as to, okay, how can I help this person to clarify where they want to go? And it's difficult. And when you're first starting it, it's a muscle that takes a while to build strength and to get comfortable with how to use it. And then some people really struggle with it, and other people eventually get to a point in time where it's just an inbuilt part of who they are and what they do. But it's bloody hard work.
And is it tied back to values? Because I mean, just for example, using one of my personal values is personal responsibility. We have a whole lot of values we talk about with our little 5-year-old daughter, family values like honesty, integrity, fairness, etc. And do you find that once people start to understand what their core values are and what they want out of their life or want for their children, do you think that helps with the whole process of getting the vision?
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's part of getting that vision, and then your goals must be aligned with your values. If any of your goals are incongruent with your values, then you'll self-sabotage. You just won't achieve them. So that it's central to that vision, values, and goals.
Yep. And documenting it, does that help, or is that another important step?
It is, absolutely. And it's about just clarifying your focus. So you don't need to necessarily go and reread them every day. Some people say you have them visual where you look at them all the time. I don't know that that's the case. I think for some people it is, but I do feel that process of writing it down, even if it's just that once, is absolutely critical. That it's making a genuine commitment with yourself that this is real. This is something that is important to you.
Today's episode is brought to you by AgriCoach. You've worked bloody hard over the years and you've built a solid operation. But as your children grow up and start their own journeys, you're beginning to think about the next 5, 10, and even 15 years and how to keep driving the business forward and ensure a smooth and successful succession plan. Preparing the business, preparing the next generation, and preparing for your eventual retirement all requires a solid plan and a proven process. Unsure about the right steps to take? Head on over to agricoach.com.au/webinar to learn more about our Succession Proof Your Family webinar. AgriCoach, aligning families, growing wealth, and protecting legacies. And now, let's get back to the episode. And what about one of the things we were talking about before we started was the whole function that people think success is a destination. So in other words, I'll be successful when I have, 5,000 breeders, or I'll be successful when I'm farming 10,000 acres, or I'll be successful when I'm worth so much money. That's the common thread. Do you think that holds true? Is that philosophy right? Or do you think it's more about being a journey?
I completely think it's a journey. And another way we look at it is success is a decision. So for us to be sitting here today, having this conversation, living where we're choosing to live, being able to have electricity to power up these computers and have this conversation and have, do what we do, is that not success? We've got clean drinking water and we've got access to good food. Is that not success? So what do we need? And we're both having this conversation because we chose to do it. It's our decision to be here having this conversation. And so I think there's a model that we use that if we look at be, do, and have, where I see a lot of people get caught is that they want to have those things that you just talked about. And so because I want to have these things, I then go and do certain things. I do things so that I can have that. So I'll do things so I can have money to go and buy that, or I'll do this so that I can have things. And then we tell ourselves a story that if I do this, then I'll have that, and then I'll be happy, or then I'll be successful. And successful, you've got to be careful at a being, because it's not a being word for me, successful. And the trap is that you get caught in that do-have cycle. You want to have stuff, so I do things so that I have that. And you don't stop to be the person you want to be. You don't stop to be there for your child. You don't stop there to be there for your partner, because you're caught. There's always things to do. And every business you work in, there's always more things that you could do. That never disappears. And what's really powerful is to turn these terms around and start with, who do you want to be? And this is aligned with your values. So who is the person that you want to be? And the extension of this is, are you a human being or are you a human doing? And we've a lot of people that are human doings, and who they are is made up by what they do. And the problem with that is that eventually, particularly if we link this to agriculture, it's a physical sport to be in. And so when you can no longer do the physical nature of being involved in a farm, then who am I? And so if we can get you to identify who you want to be, and that might be, you might want to be happy. You might want to be a good parent, a good partner, a good sibling. You might want to be content. You actually don't need to have anything to be those. That's a decision. That's that talked before about that choice that you make at this point in time. And then if that's the person you want to be, then you do things to allow you to be that person. And it takes timelines completely out of the equation when you do that.
Because you can be now, can't you?
You can be now. An example that I love to use on this is mothers. I've sat around plenty of kitchen tables talking about some fairly emotional topics, and you'll have the parents sitting there agitated or upset or concerned about where the position might be or where they're heading, and then a child will come in, and the ability to choose a different state in that moment, to completely be there to be a good parent and not pass on that any stress or anxiety that's around might be a business or a people thing we're discussing to the side, but that ability just to choose that state and shift. It just always amazes me how powerful that capacity is. And so that's just an example about how we know we can do it because we do it all the time. It's just that we don't choose to do it in the areas that are probably quite fundamental to us being happy and content, which, if we come back to what is success, well, it's probably being happy and content. And what makes us happy and content, I would say, is living the life you want to live and achieving what you want to achieve, which is that visions and goals again.
Yeah. And look, some people I've observed over the years is they just want to work hard. That's the person they want to be. They want to work hard, and they want to put in the hours, and they want to leave a legacy. Might be an estate for their children, or they might want to make a mark on the world, and that's fine. But I think the really important part, and I'd love to hear your feelings on that, is making sure that you've thought through that and not just fallen into that role, if that makes sense. Because I felt like for many years I fell into that role, which was I was taught growing up on the farm, you work hard, there's jobs to be done. The harder you work, the luckier you'll get. But I think that it's very easy to fall into a path that you may not want to be on and identify that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do need to work hard. No matter what business we're involved in, nothing takes away from that need to do it. And so that hard work is an essential ingredient, and it's a great skill to pass on to kids as well.
But is it hard work is two sorts of things, isn't it? There's cognitively hard and physically hard. So traditional farmer, it's about physical hard work. I mean, my grandfather was all about hard work, and they go out working hard all day. But for many people, and being back in the office and doing this planning and goal setting and budgets and business plans, etc., is harder than going out and mustering or branding or planting the crop in any way, shape or form. And I think that is a way of working hard as well.
It is. And relationships are hard work too.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So throw that into there. And I think it might be worth just, if we step back and look at, what are your roles? Most people in business, they've got operational roles that do need that hard physical work. They've got strategic and planning goals, which is that harder cognitive work. They've got their role as a business partner. They've got their role as life partner to the husband and wife. They might have a role as a parent, and they're all roles. And so what's needed there is the ability to look at how you're going to prioritise your time, which is your most precious commodity that you have, to each of those. And are you going to prioritise everything to that physical, operational side of things at the cost of not being present or having the bandwidth to invest any in the other areas? And I think that's where growth for growth's sake is a terrible strategy. And we've all met and seen people that they didn't see we'll pick on the Australian males in farming for a minute, but where they haven't seen the kids that didn't see their parents grow up when they were growing up because they were gone before daylight and didn't get back till after dark. And their intent and reason for doing that is always noble. It's always about creating something better than what quite often the parents had. However, when it's all done and dusted, and a useful tool that I use is to go jump forward 10 years and look back. So in 10 years' time, looking back on this week or this month, what's actually going to be important? What would it have been important that you've just done a 90-hour week and haven't seen your family again? Or is it that you've put in a really solid week and done a lot of work as well as spending some time with family.
It's interesting on that spending time with family with Sophie. One of the things I found really hard when I was running the business was having enough hours in the day to do what I did and then give her quality time. And Sarah, my wife, I'll not throw her under the bus, I'll throw me under the bus and show how smart she is. But one of the things she said to me one day, she goes, "It feels like the business gets the best of you and sometimes we get the worst." And so what she meant by that is I worked and hard and delivered and did my absolute best for the family. But by the time I came home, I was totally fried. And we talked about this for quite a while. And that really resonated with me because it took me back. I was offended to start with. I was like, hang on, what do you mean by that? You don't get the worst of me. But I actually looked at it and went, yeah, well, I'm distracted. I come home. I'm tired. I'm doing long hours. I'm traveling. This is not working. And we sat down and looked at Sophie and said, well, how much time does she need? Sarah had read a book at the time. I can't remember who it was. And she said, kids really respond massively to 10 to 20 minutes of close one-on-one time a day. So now Sophie and I have quality time, we call it, and it's 2 lots of 10 minutes a day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and we try and do that as much as we can, and she gets to pick what we do. So we are playing ponies and dolls and swinging on the swing set together. You can imagine with a 5-year-old all the fun stuff we do, but 2 lots of 10 minutes absolutely change the relationship. So we forget sometimes in success that it doesn't mean all or nothing, or it has to be a big input. It's like planning the business. You might only need to set aside 2 days a year out of 365. I mean, that's all you might need to do. Yes, you have to be present in those 2 days, but that's maybe all you need to do, or once a quarter or once a year even.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a critical point, how we're not talking about leaving home at 9 a.m. and getting back at 4 p.m. type things. It's these little moments and being truly present in those moments and having the bandwidth to be present. And this comes back again to this choice, this decision that we're making. What's the choice you want to make? And link it back to visions there before a program I was running last week. I said to the group, and one of the most powerful ways to help people clarify visions that I found is to get them to write their own eulogy. It can be quite confronting and it can be emotional. It usually is emotional for somebody in a group when you're doing it. But if you were to pick somebody that you love or have a huge amount of respect for, when your time comes though to sit there and to recount the mark that you left on this earth, what do you want them to say about you?
It's generally not, they made lots of money.
They made lots of money and they're a miserable bastard to be around. Yeah, that's not the linkage with this. It's those little micro decisions that you make around what you want to do. Because that 10 minutes that you just talked about there, being truly genuine and present for that 10 minutes with the people that are important to you, that you're usually working very hard for. Another spanner to throw in there is that if you're sitting there and you're about to do something and the phone rings and it's your agent or it's a supplier or wants to talk about that, and you weren't expecting their call and they needed to talk about something for 5 or 10 minutes, would you find the time to do it? Inevitably, absolutely. Yes, you would. So the 5 or 10 minutes was there. It's about how we choose to invest it. And I think that time, it's that most precious commodity that we've got. And so we need to be really diligent and deliberate with how we choose to invest that time. And I think looking back, that's the one that I feel, and some of the people I've spoken to, they look back and they don't regret having or not having money. They've regretted where they've spent time.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And the other one that I find people always regret, David, which has interested me a lot over the years, is I like to ask, and I'm putting in inverted commas, old people, what they do if they had their time again. Yep. And I've done that a lot over my 20 years in the industry. And as a kid, I was one of those annoying kids that always asked why. And my dad used to take me along to bull sales and cattle shows and things like that, sit me up on the railing with some old fella who was probably as old as me now and say, ask that old fella what he'd do if he had his time again. And so I still do that today. It's a really weird thing. But one of the major ones I find also is take more risk. Because most of the things we worried about never occurred. What I'd like to do is, can we just duck out to the side a little bit for the moment? Because you've worked with people who were right at the beginning of their journey, shall we say. They come and see you. They might have been producing for 20 years, but they're in their journey to improving. And then you've obviously working with people that are highly successful and have been doing this for a long time. What are some of the key traits you see in the people when they start? And if you looked and you went and saw them 10, 15 years later, what transition do you think you would have seen, and what are some of the key traits you would have seen over that time, or the learnings or developments or change in personality, etc.?
I reckon one of the key ones is around focus. And to go back to some of Stephen Covey's work, or even going right back to Marcus Aurelius' times, being conscious of what you can actually control or have some influence over versus those things that you have no control over. And I think that would be central to one of those shifts that we see happening across time, is that you go from having that focus on those things that absolutely concern you and absolutely have an impact on your operation, you can't do anything about, to looking more inwards as to what can we do.
And so what can we do to mitigate? We can't avoid that risk. The risk's still there. It's going to happen, or it may or may not happen. What can we do within our operation? So so focus on what you can control, what you can't.
Which is that attitudinal shift. And I think as I reflect on that question that you asked, it's that really would be central to it. And I can't think of anybody that I would put into that category of being really successful that doesn't do a really excellent job on making that separation. And I think we, as an industry, if we were to generalise there, over time, what's kept most people awake at night or stressed or worried has been rainfall, market prices, interest rates, and government legislation. I'd say they would be up there with the big four that would cause a lot of stress in the rural industry. And yet they all sit completely outside of our circle of control or influence. We can't do anything about them. And so we need to come inwards and right, what can we do? So we can't control how much rain we get. However, in a grazing business or in a cropping business, how can we make ourselves rain ready? How do we make it so that every single drop we get, we're doing our utmost best to harness that rain, harvest it, and turn it into productivity? Market prices. It's cyclical. We've got no control over it. We can muck around the edges of what we get paid. However, we've got absolutely no control over it. So what's your cost of production? Do you know and manage what your cost of production is? Because if you know what that is, and if you can have a low cost of production business, then the market can do what it wants to do. You've got that buffer that's there. Actually, there's a thought that popped in my head there. I actually feel sorry for anybody that's starting business in agriculture at the moment in one way, because they've got record high commodity prices and record low interest rates. If somebody were to say, "Oh, this is normal," it could be a pretty painful career for them when interest rates come up again and when commodity prices go through their next cycle, which we don't know when, but it'll shift. It'll come around. So
it always happens in swings and roundabouts. It's never going to be perfect all the time. And one of the things I remember hearing years ago, earlier in my career, David, was I had a couple of people that I worked with that were really successful, and one of the things I found was, let's just say, people that weren't doing as well were continually complaining about the weather. Is it going to rain? It's going to stop raining. I haven't had enough rain. That was the continual focus all the time. And I'm a farmer's son, so I get the whole concept of, rain's really, really important.
It is.
But then I'd talk to the people that were doing really well and going forward, and they didn't have any extra resources. Like, it's not like they were, in a stronger position, but they had a different mindset. So their words, when you talk about the weather, they say, "Yeah, geez, it's bloody dry, but it'll rain. We just got to get on with business." Whereas the others were paralysed almost with inaction. So I thought that was a really important point. And I'm guessing, do you see that as well? And I think rain's just an indicator. I mean, it could be commodity prices, it could be interest rates, etc. But do you see that as a really important one as well?
It is. It's that focusing on what it is that you can actually influence. And what can you actually do something about? We link it back to time. Your return on investment by worrying or wishing for rain is zero. It's your most valuable commodity is your time, and if you're spending it wishing for something that you can't control to be different, then it's going to chew up energy, time, relationships. Whereas they're coming back to what can you do about it? Yep, so rain, absolutely, it's the lifeblood of what we do. However, we can't control when we get it. So you've got to shift that attitude, and for me personally, making this shift myself through my lifetime.
It's hard, isn't it? Because it's something that's ingrained in us to worry about the weather. I mean, I look outside now and I check the rain gauge, and I'm not a farmer or a grazier, but I still look at it and think about the rain. It's ingrained in us.
It is. When you can make that shift, it is hard. Any change is hard. It's liberating. Because you feel all of a sudden you go from being in a position where something that you can't control is in control of you and your business, and
you're a victim.
You're that victim in the situation, and that's not a good spot to be because you feel powerless. When you make that shift to going, right, we can't control how much rain or when, but I can control how ready I am, and I can control the decisions that I make now. You're in control. And that's a really powerful spot to be in, both from a personal point of view, from a mental health point of view, right through to a business health point of view.
And so do you find there's the people that usually you've dealt with or have come for advice or consulting or something like that are naturally numbers people? So they come in and they're going, oh, look, I'm worried about the numbers and you're the sort of people we want to speak to. And then they just build on that? Or do you find most people, like, we sort of get the concept that we need to operate as a business and we need to look at that, but we know nothing about it, and it becomes a bit of a journey for them over time? Because I'm guessing very few people are going to become successful if they don't know their numbers. That's my sense. And I've seen one in my whole career, and he was illiterate, had a very large contracting business. He was just an absolute amazing person to me. Everything was in his head. He didn't know all the technical numbers, but he knew not what was coming in, what was coming out, and how much he was making every day. It was in his head. So how's that journey go, do you think, over time? Because I think a lot of people haven't had the benefit of going to uni and learning all that stuff, have they?
With that person that you just mentioned there, I bet that they had a really innate, strong business sense.
They did, very strong, and they thought like a business owner.
Yes, yeah, and I've met a few people like that as well. That they may not get in and analyse stuff on paper or in a spreadsheet. However, they know where things are at, and I think that's what's important. You've got to focus on the outcome with this. Well, why do we need to know the numbers? Why do we need to do analysis? Is so that you know where things are at. You know your current reality, and you know what makes your business tick. And
well, you measure your rain, don't you?
Yeah, that's right.
Like so why aren't you measuring whether you're making a profit or what your costs are, or did I make some money out of that crop?
You're driving down the road in a machine. You want to know where your fuel gauge is and your speedo gauge is. You're not going to take off on a trip unless you knew how much fuel you had, or you're not going to travel on many of these roads without knowing a speedo because of the repercussions. It's short term. I think that there's definitely those people that have got that really strong innate business sense. I mean, they're very unique and a real joy to work with. They just know what's going on and they make really good business decisions, but it's quite intuitive. However, I've made the observation is that there aren't many people like that.
They're generally geniuses, I've found.
Yeah,
they're super intelligent. They just usually suffer from dyslexia or something like that.
Yeah, and I think most people have met somebody like that, and then they actually then operate with the delusion that they can be like that because that person does it. I don't need to know my numbers. They don't do the numbers. And that's where I've seen people lose considerable amounts of money by trying to operate off that pure gut instinct or innate sense when they actually don't have that same degree of genius capacity that those people do. So I think it's about being really clear with who you are and what your capacity is and what you're genuinely able to do. And I think, come back to your question there about that knowing the numbers and the business sense. I don't think I'd be exaggerating too much to say that a lot of people in agriculture, particularly the blokes, they believe that there's a taipan in every office. And so, you want me to go to the office, I'll just go and set the hay shed on fire because I'd much rather put that out than go and spend time in the office, which isn't good. When you're running multi-million-dollar operations, that's a really dangerous situation to be in. And so we've got to spend a lot of time helping people to understand the important link between the paddock and the office and what you see with that numbers is you've just got that offer stuff, and stereotypically you'll have the female, you just do that offer stuff. Now, it's not always the case, but it's more common. That's why I mentioned that. You just deal with that offer stuff, and I'll do this bit and you do that bit. And they talk about it as being separate worlds. And the problem with that being separate worlds is they actually don't know what's going on, because all they're doing is doing their tax accounting, which doesn't tell them their reality. So therefore it doesn't.
No, and that's a big mistake, isn't it? You know, just doing the day-to-day work in the office isn't going to get you where you want to go.
Yeah.
You've got to do planning. You've got to analyse the numbers and the details that you've got.
And simplifying it too. It's about trying to make it simple, which, you know, it's a bit like learning a new language. It takes a bit of work at the start. And
well, it's a whole new skill.
It's a new skill. And even if you are university educated, it doesn't mean you know anything about analysing a business. I mean,
hang on. When I got out of uni, I knew everything.
You knew everything. Everybody did.
22-year-old Ben knew everything. Absolutely. I'd spent 4 years at uni. I was able to go home and tell my dad how to do everything right.
Those are the years. You know, we all need to keep educating and upskilling, and you know, it's interesting if you've got a machine that's broken down now. I think it's great how many people you see, though, oh, geez, I don't know how to do this, so I'll go and look at a YouTube video and somebody will tell me how to get that apart or something like that. And yet we've got this multi-million-dollar business that's not working, and we go, need to go and work harder. And we need to be making sure we're doing the right things hard. We're doing the right things well. So that numbers, and I just want to come back, it's about when you make that linkage between the paddock and the office, when you can help a business to understand that those records and that information that you're keeping about livestock numbers or crop data, that is critical for understanding profitability in management accounting. And so we've got to have confidence in that. And so therefore we need to have that congruence between the paddock and the office. And then that it's not two different worlds, it's actually one, and it's your world, it's your business. So you need to make that connection and get simple processes in place. And I know plenty of people will probably come and work with me and go, geez, there's nothing simple about what you talk about with business. And the first time you hear it, it's probably not.
Yeah, but you dump a city slicker out on a property and say, now run that property. They'll sit there with a blank look on their face saying, this is just ridiculously hard. It's just all about experience and time in the game.
And how to make it simple. Now, what information do you need? And it comes back to decision making. What information do you need to make better decisions? You talked before about those two operations next door to each other, same resources, same climate, same soils, and yet they'll have completely different outcomes. It's the decisions they make in those circumstances. And so what information do you need to help you to make good decisions? And that's where the numbers come in. It's doing numbers and doing analysis and not using it to make decisions is a complete waste of time.
Well, that's what tax accounting is, isn't it? You know, the majority of business owners get their books done by their accountant, and it comes in, the accountant shows them you made a profit, you made a loss, whatever it might be. You piff it in the filing cabinet, and that's it. It's only for the tax department. It's completely worthless to you. In my business, I needed to do a whole different set of, shall we say, spreadsheets, for the lack of a better terminology, or graphs, to be able to work out whether my business was going well or what I could tweak to make it go better.
And linking, come back to success. You know, most people do want to grow, and whether you're in a family business or an aggregated ownership business, whatever it may be, usually there is a need for growth, either for next generations or for investors and returns. So growth is important. And so they're making sure that what you're doing now is getting you towards those goals around growth and what you need to do. And it's about that control now, not waiting for things to line up. And your hope is not a strategy.
No. And it's really interesting. I've talked to clients over the years about, you know, they say, should we buy another place? Or we want to buy another place, can we afford it? And of course, I have no expertise in that area. I'm a financial advisor. I'm not a farm management advisor. I don't have the skills or the experience. And I said, okay, well, if the first place you want to be able to work out is, would the bank lend you the money? And so I'm not saying that's the only reason to borrow the money and grow. It's probably just a small portion of the decision making. But one of the things is to go along to your bank and say, Mr. and Mrs. Bank Manager, we're looking at borrowing some more money in 1, 2, 3 years' time or 10 years' time. What does our business have to look like for you to be able to support that? And so they'll start to give you potentially some numbers, et cetera, you can go back and work on. And it might be something like pay down some debt or, increase your productivity, whatever it might be. And I think that's what you're sort of getting at there is to be able to know what you can measure, you manage, and then say, okay, well, if I want to get better, what do I improve? Do I just need to work another 20 hours a week? Do I need to buy the neighbours, or do I just need to be making more kilos per hectare, or do I need to increase my fertility? Whatever the details are. Yeah,
it's about what's most limiting profit in your business at this point in time, and we go looking for dead wood in a business. So where's the dead wood? What's not actually contributing to your performance? I'll throw a third one into that when you're talking about the bank and the accountant in there. And that's your profitability decision. So I think the way that I wouldn't approach it, which is probably a little bit too common, is we go and talk to the bank and the accountant about going and buying that property. Now, they're important people to have a discussion with, absolutely. The first person we need to ask is ourselves. And so come back to your vision. Where does this fit in? What's the purpose behind this? What goal, what direction is this property acquisition going to take you in? So let's talk about the alignment with your values first. Next question to ask is profitability. And this is not something that this is where an agri-advisor comes in more so than a bank or accountant. It's around how profitable is your existing business? Always got to start there. Is your current business profitable, or are you going to go and scale out a business which actually isn't working very well? So how profitable is your existing business, and then how profitable is the decision to go and buy that property? If buying that property isn't profitable, then I don't really care what the accountant or the bank manager says. If it's not profitable, it's not profitable. It's nothing to do with whether we can get access to the funds to go and buy it or not. We've got to start with that profitability question first, which is that management accounting. And then we look at the finance. How do we cash flow it? How do we fund it? And that's where that conversation with your banking partner comes in. How do we make this work? Because you've already worked out it's profitable. So then you go and have that. And then talking with your accountant as well. What's the best way to set this up? How do we make this work from a taxation and stamp duty and legalities point of view? That order is absolutely critical. If we turn that order over, that's where that decision to go and buy that property just goes pear-shaped.
Yep. And that's probably a really important point that I missed is when I did the presentation for you guys a couple of years ago on the 7 steps to successfully off-farm investing. My point was always do it in the right order. You got 7 steps. Don't start at step 6.
Yeah.
And every time someone's come in and said it's failed, it's because they started at step 2 or step 5, not step 1. So I think that's a really important point, is start at the beginning and work your way through. Don't do it with a shotgun approach. And just on that point, do you find that choice of the team around them is a really big factor as well? So what I mean by that is the successful ones, they demand the best accountant, they demand the best bank manager, the best agri-advisor, financial advisor, solicitor, and also too, they surround themselves with other successful producers so that the success, so to speak, or the growth becomes the norm. Do you find that as well happens over time?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's about having that support around you. And it's that acceptance too that your decisions are your decisions. It's not somebody else's decisions. And, the role of anybody around that business owner is there to support that person. So having that good support team around you, it's no different to in a workplace, is it? You need to have a good team of people around you, whether you're talking about a harvest team or a stock camp. You've got to have that good team of people. And when we're talking about those multi-million-dollar decisions that have been made at that level, it's just as important. And it's accepting that you are running a multi-million-dollar operation. There's a separation that occurs a little too often, whereby we'll talk about how big the business is, but we don't run it like a business.
Yeah, you've got to stop thinking like a farmer and think like an agribusiness owner.
Yeah, being willing to think about what is the right decision, and if I don't have the skills, how do I employ them? And I think that's where that team comes in. It's being honest with your own skills. Some people got huge skill sets in multiple areas. They might have even worked in other sectors before ending up on that farm. And it's knowing where their gaps are. And if you don't have the skills, then you've got to employ them. And it's about different perspective too. And I think it's good to have some people that you know are going to challenge you. If you just surround yourself with yes people that are going to agree with everything that you say, well, I think you're setting yourself up to fail. You've got to have some people that are going to challenge you to be that best version of yourself and to help you to be accountable come back to your comment before, my values about the self-responsibility.
And so one of the things I found a couple of years ago it is now, David, is one of my clients at the time had been with RCS for many years, and they were doing your profit probe, I think it was. And it was a really interesting discussion I had at the time. Is they were going through, I think once a year they had to redo the numbers, and then it got benchmarked against everyone else that was out anonymously in the market to be able to get a benchmark of what all the producers are doing. And I know they were doing it, and they found that incredibly valuable because they said, we think we're doing well, but we don't really know, because the people in the rural industry, everyone's very closed. They don't like to talk about their position, their failures, their wins, how they're producing. It's a very confidential sort of a situation. And so they were able to go through and go, holy dooly, I can't remember the exact line category, but it might have been, kilos of beef per acre, or transportation costs, I think was one of them, what it was costing them to get that beef, off to market or something like that. And theirs was, I think their cost of production was way above everyone else, and their cost to get them to market. And they were able to work on those two things, and it made a monstrous difference to their business. And they said, we would never have known that without being not only able to measure that thing on our business, but then benchmark it against someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the tool to help you identify where that dead wood is. So what aspects of your business are not performing as well as they could? What's most limiting profitability in your business at this point in time? Unless you dig in and have a look at that analysis, and then you don't know. Without breaking down your business and having a look, it's a bit like approaching your business decisions like playing darts blindfolded at 3 a.m. after a big night. You might be hitting the target, you might get lucky, and sometimes you might be putting that energy into then just throwing your money in completely the wrong direction. Two things with benchmarking. I think it's comparing yourself to yourself. So I think where people really start to see that value is from about the third year on, particularly, because they're starting to identify their trends, and they're starting to see what's coming out of their business decisions. So they'll identify where some dead wood is. They'll identify some directions they want to take the business, and they'll go and put that into place. And they get to say, righto, what impact is that having on profitability? What impact is it having on that specific area that we've been working on? Which way am I trending? And how does that compare to the cohort? How does that compare to my peers? For example, the ladies that works with us up north, the first time she, as a client, saw this, and she realised that one of the other people on her executive link board had a much lower cost of production. And she goes, well, righto, how are you doing that? And that started this conversation. Well, hang on, if you're doing it and you're operating in the same area as me, why can't I do it? What do I need to do to be like you? And before that, they didn't realise their cost of production could be so much better. So we don't know what we don't know.
What you can measure, you manage, and that becomes, you become conscious about your incompetence, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's building into your business the capacity or the resilience to be able to absorb all those things we can't control. What's your capacity to absorb a drop in market? What's your capacity to absorb a drop in carrying capacity through a poorer season? What's your ability to absorb a failed crop, whatever it may be? It's that knowing just how important, how you operate. And there's probably something else I'll throw back into your question before around those businesses that make that shift. It's that acceptance that variability is normal. When we talk about rainfall, people always talk about country, this is 500 mil country or whatever it may be, and that average. So I refer to average rainfall as a unicorn. It doesn't exist, and yet strategically we've got so many businesses that their strategy and their structure is only designed to work in an average year, which to me means that you're actually strategically structured to fail, because most of the time you're either having higher rainfall or lower rainfall than that area there. So I think those businesses that are more successful are the ones that are accepting of their reality, that variability in seasons and commodity prices and everything and legislation is normal. And I find that one fascinating, because there's nobody at all that would disagree that we get variable rainfall. And yet the next conversation will be, geez, it'd be good if we can get back to some good normal seasons. This flood, this drought, this is normal seasons. No point wishing for it to be different. You've got to manage for what it is and look for the opportunities that's there as well. That shift in mindset is just so important.
It is, yeah. And so do you also find that they're very actively thinking about the next generation and planning for that? So again, the wishing's not going to get you anywhere, but are they actually being like when they're defining the goals or thinking about the vision, being able to really invest some time to be able to go to two things. One is, what's our plan for the next generation? Two, and then investing in the next generation. And I'll give you a reason for this is I remember I had a client many years ago and they had a really successful cotton business, huge cotton place. And mum and dad run a very tight ship, very good operation. Son was running the operation side of the business. So he was doing all the farming and the irrigating and all that sort of stuff. And mum and dad handled the finances and the forward selling, etc. He got to about 36 or 37 and they popped up one day and realised he can't manage this business. He had no experience or skills in dealing with the banks, the accountants, and had no desire to do it after getting to 36 or 37. And they realised that their succession plan was going to fail. And they said to me later on, they said, we absolutely regret the fact that we didn't involve him from when he was 15 or 16 in the office talking about the business of cotton, not the production of cotton. And that's our biggest regret. And in the end, it did fail. They had to make some changes. But do you find that people are looking at the future and then planning it early on?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you see both, don't you? Unfortunately, there'll probably be a lot of people listening that are thinking, Jesus, 37-year-old, I've got 40 and 50-year-old kids that actually haven't seen the numbers yet. And that's the one that scares me. One client who looked at all their neighbours, and every single one of their neighbours, the checkbook, all the numbers were still being controlled by the parents who were in their 70s and 80s. So you had kids coming through 40s and 50s, kids who didn't know about that business of producing whatever they're producing. And that's terrifying. So absolutely, when we're looking at your decisions, we spend a lot of time helping people to. The decision isn't about now. The decisions aren't about what's coming on in this next month, week, month, or year, or a few years. If we're to take this out to 1,000-year time frame, what decision would you need to make now? And if you're in a business, and if we link it to succession, if you would like to see your business to continue into the future, then you've just agreed to replace yourself. Because the only way that your business can continue into the future is if you find a way to replace yourself. And so therefore we need to be slowly investing in those skills that are required and needed for that person to be able to take over from whatever it is that your role. So if you're responsible for doing the books, then you've got to make sure that you've got somebody coming in behind you to do that, or maybe multiple people, depending on the business. And on the kids one there, I think that once you've got children that are of an age that they're not going to disrupt a business meeting, so once they're old enough that they're not going to interrupt it or take away from what your conversation, I think include them in it then. And that'll be different ages for different kids. I don't think there's an age with it, because the sooner they know the reality and are involved with that and they're growing up around it, that's setting them up for a win. And it's being honest. And I'm loving now, RCS has been around for long enough that we're working with quite a lot of second generation clients, and now quite often our schools have got third generation clients coming through. So we've worked with the parents and the grandparents, and I'm just so excited for these next generations that have been growing up in this. And I was talking about it with one of my colleagues the other day. We had to make all the mistakes and learn all this, and had to learn how to make that shift from what you can't control to what you can influence. And these kids are just growing up with that being normal.
Yeah. That's the normalization is so important.
And it's just so exciting to see their mindset and their attitude that they're coming out of the starting blocks in such a powerful mindset, in control, and they, filling in a grazing chart. Well, doesn't everybody do that? And spending time working on the business, doesn't everybody do that? And that's their attitude. And I just think I can't wait to see what this generation achieves, because they're going to absolutely kick some goals, because they're not waiting until their 30s and 40s to have to try and learn it like some of us had to.
For sure. And kids like I said, via osmosis, they pick it up and they're naturally curious. And hopefully the idea is that they will do better than us because they'll be starting at a much earlier base, which I think you mentioned. And a couple of things I used to find in my financial advice meetings, quite often kids would come along and some of them times they were really young. And some of them you'd see would pop up and ask questions. They're like, what's an investment? Like, what's a dividend? Or, and we'd have discussions around estate planning. But the number one thing is that I found as kids got older was the whole fact of if you want to take over this farming business, mum and dad have to retire and mum and dad have to fund that. So the quickest way for you to get into this farming business is to help mum and dad build their off-farm assets to be able to fund the retirement, and it'll take more pressure off. So this building your off-farm assets for retirement is about you, not about mum and dad. So, and that brings them on board and changes the discussion. And then they start thinking about, okay, well, how do we generate more profit out of this business to be able to do that rather than, mum and dad are just greedy and just pulling that money out of the business and sticking it over there to make themselves wealthier. It changes it. And kids will pick up that over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you bring that back of having clarity on vision and goals, that's what it is. Okay, if parents want to retire and do that, well, then this is the work that you've done, isn't it? Okay, how much money would you need to be able to do that? So, right, let's step that back now. So in 10 years' time, what do we need to have grown to be in a financial position to be either ready to do that or on the way to do that? Okay, if that's where we need to be in 10 years, where do we need to be in 5 years? And if that's where we need to be in 5 years, where do we need to be in 1 year? And that's when that setting direction, setting goals, setting targets becomes a bit easier when you've got that clarity because it's something that you're passionate about moving towards.
Yeah. And you can be successful today because I would argue that if you've got a vision and you're heading towards that vision and today you wake up and go, okay, what can I do today to make that vision happen? And if you do that today and you start making, steps towards your ultimate vision, you're successful today.
Yes.
That's the reality. It doesn't take 10,000 hours or 20 years to be successful. It's what can I do today to get there?
Yeah, and celebrating the progress that you are making or the growth that you are making or the skills that you are learning. And if you can be happy with that, then you'll find that you'll be a happier person. If you're always waiting for something before you can be happy or before you can consider yourself to be successful, you just spend a lot of time waiting.
Yeah, that reflection on where you've come from is really important. I used to give people the analogy, and I still do today, is, as a kid, I remember getting out of the four-wheel drive and jumping in the tractor and driving round and round around the paddock all day. I loved it as a kid. And I remember getting to lunchtime or the afternoon and you'd have to walk back to the ute. And you get out of the tractor and it's way across the flat and you'd start walking and ages would go by and you think, geez, I'm still nowhere near the ute. And then all of a sudden you turn around and look at where you've come from and you go, holy dooly, the tractor's a long way back there.
Yeah.
And so I tried to talk through people that there's some real value in actually having a vision, but the horizon is always going to keep going further out. So sometimes it's really important to look back and see where you come from and celebrate where you've come. Now, sometimes you won't quite be where you want to be, but if you've done the right things and you've refocused your vision and you're taking steps forward, you always have going to make some progress, and you should celebrate that because it's tough. Like it gives you the energy you need when you see some success to keep moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's critical to look back and learn from what has happened. So look back and learn, analyse, consider, reflect, and then look forward and consider where you're heading, what might occur, what might come up. And you learn from that past and you consider that future, but then you make your decisions now. So some people will naturally sit living in the past or living in the future, and it's important to try and get processes there to help them to make their decisions now. You can't make a decision if you're constantly living in the future.
Yeah.
You've actually got to come back to think about the repercussions of those decisions now. What's the relevance of that now? And it's that analogy too around when you're driving a vehicle, your windscreen is that big and your rear vision mirror is this big. So you just doing because what's behind you can't change. You need to learn from that and just think about what you control going forward. I love that visual.
Yeah, makes a whole lot of sense. Excellent. Now, we've probably taken up done a fair bit of time here today, so I think that's probably a really good point to stop. I could chat with you about this for another 2 days, I'm sure. So what I'd like to do is give us 3 things you think that someone could do today to start moving them towards success or to helping them do better? What are 3 things you think they could do?
3 things to move them towards success.
Well, let's say to do better.
To do better, I think it'll determine what it is that you really want. That's, I think, number one. You've got to know what is it you're actually wanting.
Yeah, what do you really want out of this? Like, what's the actual objective?
What do you really want? What is really important to you? Where are you really heading? And then think about where your focus is. So focus on what it is that you want. And that applies to everything. If you want to be happy, we'll focus on being happy. If you want to be content, focus on being content. If you want to buy another property, we'll focus on doing things that are going to help you to buy another property. This applies to absolutely everything. And then think about the decisions that you make now and what impact that is going to have. So your decisions that you make now and the choices that you make now are critical. And it's being comfortable with failure.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Be comfortable with failure.
Yeah, being comfortable with making mistakes. And some people hate those 2 words. The reality was that because there's so many things that we can't control, we're going to get it wrong at times. So rather than wishing for it to not be the case, because we don't celebrate, we don't talk about the failures, we only talk about everyone does everything right. And it's absolute bullshit. Nobody gets everything right.
Nobody learns from being right all the time.
Yeah, so just being comfortable with that, make the best decisions you can with the information you have at this point in time. I think if you determine what you want, you focus on what you want, and then make the best decisions you can with the information you have at this point in time, you'll make some really nice steps. And if you don't do any of those, I'd argue you're probably going to be waiting on somebody or something else to get you there.
They're probably 3 really good ones. I mean, so determine exactly what you want and then work out what you need to do to start pushing you in that direction, and then asking you the question, what will these steps or decisions or choices, or how will that impact the future and whether we're going to get to that, and then start to become comfortable with failures or mistakes or lessons, as I like to call them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, excellent, fantastic. And the last question I like to ask everyone, another tough one, what's your definition of true wealth?
I think it links back to what we've discussed around success. I think to a lot it's doing what you enjoy, where you want to do it, having sufficient finances to provide freedom to choose what it is that you do. It's about living your passion. And talking to a financial advisor, the finance and money is one component of that. However, it's only one component of that. So I think true wealth is that living your passion and waking up excited and looking forward to what it is that you're going to do.
And do you know the theme that's come through all of that discussion today in your announcement around what you think true wealth is? Honesty, being honest with yourself. Don't sugarcoat your situation. Ask yourself the hard questions, document it, and hold yourself accountable. So it all flows through, and that's why that first question is really important, because I've found so many times over the years when you find out what people value, you'll find that's how they flow through all their discussions. So that's great. So be honest with yourself, I think, is probably the clear one, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good observation.
Excellent. Okay. Well, look, thanks very much for that. I think we can have some more discussions later on. I think that was a really great start, and you're an absolute wealth of knowledge. We've literally only just scratched the surface. So I hope everyone's enjoyed that today. I know I have, and I've learned quite a bit.
Very good. Thanks for the chat. It's been fun.
If you want to learn more about David, you can go to his website, rcsaustralia.com.au. That's R for Roger, C for Charlie, S for Sally, rcsaustralia.com.au. The information contained in this podcast is general in nature and for education purposes only. It's not financial advice. It's not legal advice. No one should act on the information without appropriate specific advice for your particular circumstances. I'm a former financial advisor and I am no longer licensed and cannot and will not give you specific or personal advice in this podcast. The Financial Bloke accepts no responsibility for any loss or damage occasioned by any person acting or refraining from acting as a result of reliance on the information in this podcast. Don't forget, you can join our new private Facebook group, The Financial Blokes Wealth and Wisdom. And thanks for joining me again today. And I'll catch you with a new episode in 2 weeks' time.